Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to take my mouse cursor and go to the menu, the File menu, New, and then I'm going to select Website. The New Website dialog appears. You can see that there are several templates that are installed, and I can also search online for templates. I'm going to make sure just to have ASP.NET Website selected. I'll need to select a location where I want to save my project and my website that I'm working on. So you can see here where it's going to place by default my website files. It's in the Documents and Settings for my current user, who happens to be Bob. In the My Documents folder, there will be a Visual Studio 2005 folder with another subfolder called Websites. And here at the very end, after the last slash, we can delete everything and type in the location where we want to save and the name we want to give to our website. In this case, I'm going to call it Hello World. Also, I want to make sure that the language is selected as Visual C#, and then I'm going to click the OK button. And after a moment or so, Visual Web Developer 2005 Express Edition will create a new website for us based on the template that we selected. Now again, I'm assuming that you are already familiar with C#, so seeing the Solution Explorer over here on the right-hand side should not be new to you. You can see here that we have one file that's in our project, default.aspx. And the .aspx file extension denotes to the ASP.NET runtime engine that will handle the page requests that come in from our web users. It lets the engine know that it should be responsible for this page. Now we have the page automatically open up in our main area, as you can see from the tabs at the very top. And what we have in line 1 is something that doesn't look anything like HTML, but everything after line 1 looks pretty much like what we would expect to see in an HTML document. You have a head, a body, and you have our HTML tag that encompasses both of those. Additionally, we have a form tag and a closing form tag, and so on. Also, take note that we're currently looking at the source view for our web page, the HTML view of our web page. We see a little icon down here that's selected that says source view. But we also, if we were to select this little design icon next to it, we get a design view. So if you've ever worked in a tool like Front Page, for example, you have a WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get, designer surface where you can drag and drop visual elements onto the designer and work with a more graphical view of our web page, or we can move over to the source and look at the underlying HTML code that comprises that page. Okay, so what we'll want to do at this point now is drag and drop a label onto our designer surface, and I'm going to drag a button to the designer surface, and I'm going to use my mouse cursor to go between the button and the label, and then just hit the enter key on the keyboard to create a little bit of a separation here. Now this is where we begin to separate ourselves from just building another HTML page. I'm going to double click on the button, and when I do that, notice that I am now looking at a C# page of code that looks very similar to the code behind for the Windows Forms applications that we've been working with up to this point. And also notice that we get some event handler code that looks very similar to if this were just a button on a regular Windows Forms application. I get protected void button 1 click, and I even get like object sender and event args passed in. So what we have is a very full-featured environment where I'm able to provide our user a web page written entirely in HTML, but work then behind the scenes whenever somebody clicks a button or interacts with the web page in some other way. I'm able to write C# code that will handle those events. And notice that this is stored in a different file, default.aspx.cs. We can look over here in our Solution Explorer and notice that we have the default.aspx, and then you can see the hierarchy underneath default.aspx, almost as if this file were to support our web page. We have the default.aspx.cs file that we're currently looking at in the main area. So I could do something like this. I've got a label 1, And you can see I get the full benefit of IntelliSense just like I do whenever I'm working with Visual Studio or Visual C# 2005 Express Edition. So when I use the dot notation, I can still see all the properties and methods that belong to a given control. In this case, I'm going to set the text property, again, similar to the label control within a Windows form application. I'm going to set this equal to hello world. And again, I'm writing C# code in order to do this. So here's what will happen. Whenever somebody clicks a button on our form, hello world will be displayed in our label. Let's go ahead and test our application to make sure that this actually works, and then we'll come back and notice some things about our application. Now we get this little message the first time we run each and every project that we create within Visual Web Developer, and that is it asks, would you like to enable debugging for this web application? If we do so, then we're going to create an entry in a configuration file called the web.config, and I'll come back to this what the web.config file actually is in another lesson a little bit later down the line. For right now, let's just use the default and select OK. And notice when I do that there is a little message that pops open from the Windows XP taskbar that informs me that we have an ASP.NET development server running at this location. And notice that it's localhost :1037/hello world. We can even see this now in our web browser. So what is the purpose of this little development server? Well, if you're not already running another web server on your desktop, say for example, you're not running Internet Information Services on your Windows XP or Windows 2003 desktop, then Visual Web Developer 2005 Express Edition supplies its own little mini testing web server that will work for the purpose of just development. Now in some organizations they won't let you put IIS on, or maybe you're running Windows Home Edition, Windows XP Home Edition, so it's not you're not even able to run a web server on your local machine. And in that case, then you've got this neat little utility that allows you to still develop applications on that platform. Another very important feature of the local web server is that it only accepts local requests. In other words, requests from your browser on your computer while you're working on the development version of your website, in order to ensure the security of your computer and your network. So nobody, while you're testing your application, is going to be able to do a port scan, find the port that your little web server is running on, and then be able to somehow break into your computer, steal files, or install any malignant code on your machine or on your network. It's just not possible. So now we have our application as it's currently running within a new instance of Internet Explorer. I'm going to click on my button and notice that when I do, that the word label is replaced with hello world. So we have an interactive application. We were able to write real C# code in order to enable some interactivity between our web page and what the client sees and the server, what actually goes on behind the scenes. And we'll talk about how this works throughout the remainder of the series of lessons. So this is pretty cool, right? I mean, we're able to leverage our existing skills in developing C# applications by being able to drag and drop items from the toolbox onto a designer surface, just like we do when we create WinForms applications. We're able to double-click the various controls and then write code to handle the events, and write code, I might add, using C# as opposed to some other scripting language. So we're able to leverage our existing knowledge of the programming language, and then we're able to deliver to the user a very interactive web-based application. But how does this all work behind the scenes? I mean, how are we able to harness some more of this power in order to build applications? Let's spend a few moments talking about the internals of ASP.NET 2.0. First of all, let's start with your current experience with building C# applications. You're probably already familiar with the concept of a .NET assembly, right? You create C# code, and then you use a C# compiler to compile that code into what's called a .NET assembly, which is a special file that has either a .exe or a .dll file extension. And then that file runs in the context of the .NET runtime, and by doing so has access to things like the .NET Framework class library. The .NET runtime manages memory and security and other things for our application. But we know that assembly that's initially created is only created using what's called intermediate language, and once that assembly is run on the target computer, that there's something called just-in-time compilation that takes the intermediate language code and converts it into a real binary that then can take advantage of the specific configuration for that computer based on the operating system, the memory, the processor, and so on. Okay, so the exact same thing happens whenever you're building ASP.NET applications.